you talk about Zionism as essentially one of the core manifestations of the ideology is that it posits that Israel or the Jewish state makes you safe. You will never be safe in the diaspora. And you break down anti-Semitism into three parts. I can't remember whether you get that from Hannah Arendt or whether that's your own formulation. But explain and the levels of danger from anti-Semitism is really determined by those three different forms or expressions of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I borrow it from Arendt, but Arendt uses it in her essay, Reflections on Little Rock, really about racism, that there are three forms of racism, what she calls the, the kind of the individual, the social, and the political. And in a sense, she makes the claim that I don't want to get into the Little Rock article about racism, but what I'm saying is that there are various forms of anti-Semitism. There are people that don't like Jews for whatever reason, but their dislike of Jews really remains very much within their private sphere. She calls it private, social, and political. And then there's the social anti-Semitism, which extends out of the private sphere into the social sphere. For example, like, summer camps and country clubs and all of things like that. And then there's the political anti-Semitism that actually becomes part of the political culture. And for Arendt, on the racism question, it's only when racism becomes political that it becomes really dangerous. And I was trying to, bring that to the question of anti-Semitism to show that, in fact, the difference between European anti-Semitism, certainly before the war, and anti-Semitism that exists in the United States today is that in the United States, anti-Semitism rarely really reaches the level of the political. It stays much more in the individual and the social sphere, which is not saying there's not a problem, but it doesn't necessarily curtail the ability for Jews to live as Jews in the United States, which is why I say in the book that I don't feel like Jews in America are oppressed.
I'm going to read this passage and then you can talk about the IDF. I did not lose my Zionism in left-wing protests. I lost my Zionism in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. It was there that I witnessed the depths and intractability of ethno-national chauvinism. It was there that I understood what longtime leader of the Jewish National Fund and lifelong Zionist Yosef Weiss said long ago in his diary, popularized in the 2021 film Blue Box, quote, "The Arabs will never forgive us for what we have done to them." Talk about the IDF and that experience.
I think a lot of people, certainly not everybody, but a lot of people in the IDF are confronted with the realities of occupation. And I wouldn't even call it occupation, the realities of what it means to dominate another society in ways that Israelis that are not serving in the IDF don't really experience. Now, of course, many serve in the IDF. And I think what I came to realize is that when you're walking through a Palestinian village, fully armed, with a loaded gun, and you see the hatred in the eyes of the children towards you, you really start to understand it. You are dominating their lives. You're humiliating their father. You're arresting their brother. There's just a sense of hatred that is palpable, and not only palpable, but from my perspective, fully understandable. And if I would have been in their situation, I would have felt the same way. And I think I came out of that experience, even with all of the, rationalizations that we were taught, this is necessary for security and so on and so forth. I mean, that may be true, but it doesn't mean that the domination is any more excusable and that the hatred is any more unreasonable. And so that's really, in a certain sense, where the fantasy cracked. When I realized for me to live the fantasy of life in the land of Israel means that I have to control the movement of another people. And that suddenly, it just seemed to me inexcusable. Now, we can argue about the nature of the state, but one of the things that is, in a certain sense, the underside of democracy is that, the people that are living in the state choose the state. And the state has, it's not that Netanyahu win in a fluke election. Netanyahu's been winning for a long time. And the Israeli left not only is now in the opposition, the Israeli left didn't even make enough votes to be in the government at all. So we're in a situation where I think that my perspective is that liberal Zionism doesn't really have any new ideas, in part because the country that it supports has chosen a different path.